the debate sometimes is whether our 4-year-olds can do what we used to do at 6. And there's a lot of research that talks about that. But I think maybe my big question is, even if, let's say, for argument's sake, that a 4-year-old should be taught to read like a 6-year-old used to be.
Right.
The question to me is, what did a 4-year-old used to do that we're so devaluing that we think that that isn't necessary anymore? And I think that's the big question.
A very, very
big question.
Point. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Because in the end, your child learning to read 2 years earlier is not going to make them a better reader by the time they're an adult.
It isn't. In fact, the developmental timetable across the board doesn't really matter unless there's a diagnostic problem. So it is true that if a child is not moving through their developmental timetable at an average rate, that it could mean that there's a problem and we need to go check that out, because if there is a problem, we definitely want some early intervention and we want to understand what's going on. But barring that, it doesn't matter when we learn to read or when we walk or any of those things. My oldest daughter started walking when she was barely 9 months old. And so that was early on the developmental timetable.
Yeah,
but
that was my
youngest. You know what? It didn't mean she was going to be an athlete, or it really was. It didn't mean anything. And I've oftentimes said in classes, we don't, as adults, look at each other and say, well, I started reading at 4 years old. When did you start reading? I mean, nobody really cares when we do all of those things, as long as we can do them. So yes, it's true that we want our children to be successful readers, but the fact that they started reading at 3 or 4 or 5 or 7, 8 or 9 really does not matter. So moving along and setting a solid foundation, that does matter. So if we skip all of these things that prepare us, foundational things that allow us to build on that, I think we've made a huge mistake. And I think we're seeing the results of that. I think we're seeing research that bears that out. We're not making the right decisions as a culture.
Right. Yeah. And I think there is some movement back towards more play, more like wild classroom, all of the outdoor learning, more of the Charlotte Mason type methods and discovery. But it's a cultural shift from the classroom environment that, I guess, my era, your era, we grew up with thinking that this was the best model. This is what we were given, and this is what works best for children. And really, it was experimental.
It was experimental, and we're starting to see some research. I think it's still played down in most circles, but yes, a lot of people are starting to speak up about it and doing a counter movement and saying, wait a minute, this may not have been the best choices. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.